Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy GDC schedule to attend this session. I really appreciate it. My name is Naoki Yoshida, and I'm the producer and director for Final Fantasy XIV. Today's talk is titled Final Fantasy XIV, Behind the Realm Reborn. I have a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. First off, allow me to do a brief self-introduction. I've been in game development for nearly 20 years. I joined Square Enix in 2005. Prior to that, I spent some time at Hudson and some other small game developers in development. After some time on Dragon Quest series and others within Square Enix, I became in charge of Final Fantasy XIV in December of 2010. As with many of you here today, I've been a long-time fan of the Final Fantasy series. My absolute favorite job class throughout is the Black Mage, and that's what I'm using in Final Fantasy XIV as well. And in the series, I'm a huge fan of FF3 and 7. And I also do consider myself a hardcore MMO player. Okay, overview. Today's talk will cover 5 big topics. To begin, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this unique title, I will provide an overview of Final Fantasy XIV. Next, I will touch upon the topic, why the original Final Fantasy XIV failed. Basically a postmortem. Following that, the development of Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, I will say it ARR for short, a reproduction of the game carrying the same name. And then talk a bit about the different business models. And finally, lessons learned through the development of a large-scale MMORPG and the future of this genre. I plan on covering a wide range of topics, and I hope you enjoy it. First, I'd like to share a bit of background on this very unique title and project, Final Fantasy XIV. The original Final Fantasy XIV went live on September 30th, 2010. It was met with poor reviews and fans and heavy criticism from the media. And the game had tons of issues. Here's just a quick list of those issues. They were pretty wide-ranging, and many of them were directly tied to the root or the stem of the game. Especially in upwards of 400 crashes a day is just not very good. To rebuild the game, Square Enix decided to round up all of its efforts and revamp the development and operations organization as of December 2010. This is where I joined the team for the first time. I was actually not part of the original FF14 team. As you see here listed, rebuilding the original, continuing the ongoing operations, and developing ARR were all being done at the same time. This was a very unique situation. In sum, it was the world's first MMORPG that challenged a rebuild and relaunch at the same time. Moreover, ARR was being developed in parallel with the ongoing operations of the original. The development period was pretty short, 2 years and 8 months, which is an extremely short period for an MMORPG. Today, I'd like to focus my talk on the reasons the original failed and how we managed to develop ARR. Generally speaking, we don't rebuild a game that failed, and we don't manage operations and development at the same time. I'm not quite sure what you'll gain out of this talk today, but I'd like to take you behind the scenes of the journey. Okay, so let's get right to the core. Let's analyze why FF14 failed. Final Fantasy XI was a successfully developed title, and we were very, very proud of it. Coming off of that success, though, the expectations were very, very high for FF14, and we launched the title. But that's where we fell into a pitfall. Take a look at some of these photos of me. I believe a very heavy dependence on successful experiences was at the root of the large reason behind the failure. Let's think about why success can lead to failure. Even after you achieve huge success, the content creation process continues. And at that point, the human psychology strongly favors a very conservative emotion, especially the feeling of wanting to stick to something that was successful, the techniques and points. And while this could very much be the secret to success the next time around, it can also work in the exact opposite manner. Although FF14 is most likely seen as a mid-scale game within the MMORPG world, the title's success not only earned stable although FF11 was. The title's success not only earned stable profits for Square Enix, but we also enjoyed a great amount of that successful experience. However, the title launched way back in 2002. We're talking about the first generation of MMORPGs when we were all following the footsteps of EverQuest 1. A very long 8 years had gone by when we went live with FF14. That's obviously a very long time in between the two titles. So in those 8 years, a lot of things changed. The MMORPG market, obviously, but the players' demands and needs basically are standards. Especially the player psychology brought out from the success of World of Warcraft. And also the great improvements made in UI during this time. Unfortunately, Square Enix's unique culture of insisting we aim for the highest graphics quality worked against these changes. I'm sure we have folks here in the audience who are working with or on MMORPGs, and I hear it all the time, but I'm sure you agree, to create a sequel for an MMORPG is truly a challenge. Take a look at the original Final Fantasy XIV. While the competition in the global MMORPG space was all about content volume, thanks to the success of World of Warcraft, we were completely devoted to improving the graphics quality. So here's a screenshot from the original FF14. Look carefully at the flower pots. To show off these flower pots, how many lines of shaded codes? What did this cost us? We used 150 lines of shaded codes, and I think we counted up to about 1,000 polygons. So what that equates to is a processing load of one playable character. In some, even if there were only one player in the space, it was as if there were multiple player characters in terms of processing load. The countermeasure taken in response to this situation was that the number of player characters shown simultaneously would be limited to 20. But the real fun of playing in a MMORPG comes from existing and sharing a world with a large number of player characters. So then why? Unfortunately, we had lost sight of that very basic feature. I also believe that this is a result of and sort of spurring on the success that we earned during the PlayStation 2 era. During this time, Square Enix was capable of producing highly detailed visual graphics our competitors couldn't. However, it wasn't really driven by technology. It was done in a very Japanese swordsmith-like manner. Basically, where we basically assembled our craftsmen's techniques to make it all happen. I don't know how many of you realize or notice that was from Bushido Blade, one of our older games. So obviously, it wasn't the work of one craftsman. We had many come together to complete the work. This was fine when we had to produce a small number of swords, or the time it took to create one didn't take very long. However, as we entered the PlayStation 3 era and more PC games were being developed in Japan, the volume or number of craftsmen started to look like this. This is pretty laughable, but because of each craftsman's obsession and desire to perfect things, even the flower pots I showed earlier, they fixated on that one thing. But, after all, the craftsmen themselves are rivals. They were saying, it worked really well in the PlayStation 2 days. If we don't deliver to their quality expectations, we're going to disappoint our fans. But I think that's the large pitfall we fell into due to our successful experiences. But if you do think about it, if you already succeeded doing it one way, it does take a lot of courage to change that method. So not limited to our own project, but this trend had a great impact on the Japanese game industry as a whole with regards to game development in Japan. To get through this required a lot of resources, developers. Obviously, to operate in an efficient manner, we had to subdivide the work that lay in front of us. Even so, eventually, we were unable to deal with the massive amount of resources and were extremely challenged to work on online games that required continuous updates. And as a result, online games are no longer really being developed in Japan, including MMORPGs, which then led to a decline of Japanese MMORPG players. It also created a situation where we were seeing fewer developers with MMORPG experience. Hopefully you're starting to notice something here. The failure of the original FF14 wasn't due to a pileup of small issues, but rather a result of frequent occurrences of small issues originating from successful experiences gained and the small gaps they ended up causing. I think this led to a colossal failure. Another thing is that Japan is a country where the majority of people are very bad at English. I myself am one of those, so I can't act like I know. But my point is that if the number of Japanese developed or MMORPGs don't increase, we won't see people play Western developed MMORPGs. And our successful experiences sort of clouded our vision, resulting in a gap between us and the needs of the market. Everything from game design, server structure, character design, to user interface. Basically everything. To summarize, these are the 3 areas that led to our failure. First is I mentioned earlier, it's the unhealthy obsession with graphics quality that existed within Square Enix's development at that time. Second is the lack of developers with knowledge and experience with MMORPGs. And third is the conceit towards our own brand, thinking that we're fine with patching things up with future updates. Similar to how we thought that just an update, really, to FF11 was going to be okay. At times, successful experiences can lead to huge mistakes. And because of the success earned earlier, the disappointment from around you when you fail is more than you will ever know. With this, we knew that we needed to make up for a failure. And so that's why we decided to rebuild the game under the same name. Next, I will talk about FF14, A Realm Reborn. As mentioned earlier, we didn't halt operations on the original FF14. Simultaneously, we worked on ARR as a brand new title. The reason for this is because if we stopped the operation of the original, we knew we'd be making 2 irreparable mistakes and would end up losing all trust from our audience. The ARR project started during a very difficult time. In the early stages, we were very conscious of the short development period we had until release. The battle against time was the most difficult thing. There are 4 points to this. The first one, the lasting or remaining life of the title, FF14. The second, the remaining life of PlayStation 3. While we've already entered the PlayStation 4 generation, back in 2011, our calculation saw the summer of 2013 as the deadline for PlayStation 3. Third, our promise to the players was that we were going to maintain regular updates, all the while developing a brand new game before that expiration date of the PS3. We needed to deliver on that to regain their trust, and it was also directly related to our profitability. And then lastly, the limitations of what we can change in the original also played a large role in determining the amount of time we had until the release of ARR. In order to carry over the player's data, we needed to minimize the amount of time between the end of the operations of the original and then launching the service for ARR. We just simply didn't have the luxury of time. So then, for a large-scale MMORPG, a development period of 4.5 to maybe 5 years is considered normal. With ARR, we successfully launched the title after 2 years and 8 months after we kicked off the project. There were, however, several things we did differently in development. But overall, the flow we created turned out to be pretty ideal. To start, let's talk about game design. There's 2 elements we focused on here. That it's the newest and the latest installment in the Final Fantasy series, and that it's an MMORPG. In other words, a dynamic story with beautiful cinematics, superior graphics quality above all else in the genre, sound design unlike any other MMORPG elements that are considered global standards. All of these in one. After game design, we move on to building out to the build-out phase. Alongside level design, we apply the game design for ARR to the update of the original. With that, we are able to work on the ARR development and original update under one design. And obviously, the basic system is different in the original, so we had to work on the update by sort of fitting it as appropriate. Once the build-out is complete, we're on to coding and asset creation. Then completion. I know these steps make it sound very simple, so let me get more into the details. So for game design, speed was very important. If we delayed this phase, it would affect the rest of production. Considering the speed of task and speed of decision-making, I myself ended up working on pretty much everything for the basic game design for ARR. There were about 400 fundamental design decisions or line items that I've written out. I gathered designers I could trust and count on. They spec'd out the design concurrently, and we would thoroughly check them in the end. During this design phase, we focused on things that are given, basically standard items. We must have these items, mandatories in MMORPGs, rather than try new things and innovate. We studied elements that were working in other competitor MMORPGs to minimize risk. Although we needed new challenges, the ongoing operations and the concurrent development of ARR were already huge challenges for us that we decided to not try and add on another layer of risk by tackling on brand new elements. Approximately 2 months went by during this phase until our programmers were able to start building. And at this point, the number of staff working on ARR was approximately 0.5% of our entire team. Next, once the basic structure of the game design was in place, the programmers got into full gear. They started building. Testing and verifying middleware went into full effect as well. One thing we did until this phase came to an end was we prohibited our ARR programmers from coding until the systems were complete. By allowing them to code while building, or maybe if they have some free time, that results in iteration afterwards and in turn increases risk. Those programmers who weren't in charge of building were asked to familiarize themselves with the design and fully understand the intent behind the design. We didn't incur any losses in terms of cost, as the majority of our programmers were working on the update for the original Final Fantasy XIV. As mentioned earlier, in Japan, we have a very small audience of experienced MMORPG players, and developers with MMORPG development experience are few and far between. Thus, in developing ARR, training our staff was extremely important. As the core design team, led by myself, worked on speccing out the design, we had our lesser experienced staff play the game over and over. At this point, the staff working on ARR was approximately 15% of the entire team. While facing the harsh reviews, we continue to provide updates to the original FF14 for those who kept playing and fans who believed in the rebuild of the title. We implemented the ARR game design as closely as possible to the concept intent, shared the vision and design with the operations team staff on the original, worked out an update cycle or a plan with them, and created a workflow for the update patches. We constantly racked our brains around how to minimize lost time and produce maximum results. So not treating our team as two separate teams, but consolidating them as one big team, this was a key point. These are the areas we were careful when planning. The fact that we were able to minimize lost time concurrently working on multiple things ultimately led to a short development team term for ARR. We currently have over 6 project managers, and their contributions to their sections are vital. Once we moved on to the build-out phase, I gradually increased the number of ARR staff in the design team and started level design. While we viewed the story as an important piece, we had no more than a plot until we approached the latter half of production. After placing only the navigation path in the field, we then focused on the player's experience and designed the quest tracks along the path. Another thing is we switched the field from seamless to a zone-based navigation. Eliminating instances allowed us to create simulations on paper, put together mock-ups, and verifying them. By doing this, we were able to create a flow that would do without the reworkings when we were ready for mass production. I was personally involved when we verified our mock-ups and provided direction on everything from the placement of landmarks at a given point in the area, the height display of a ridgeline, to the change of scenery during navigation. And in the end, I communicated this experience to the team responsible for each of the regions. The teams worked in parallel, creating a competitive spirit amongst the staff. With the majority of the elements in place to start laying out ARR and progress made in the graphics system, on October 14th, 2011, we officially announced our development of ARR. Even up until then, we were pretty active with our community through producer posts to forums and releasing information. But in conjunction with the announcement of the title, we started live streaming the latest news and information. After all, one of the main themes of this project was to win back our fans' trust. In today's social media world, it's just simply not enough to release information. A two-way communication with fan participation is necessary. We even pulled in our former president, Mr. Wada, into the mix. Overall, this new format was received very well by our fans, and since then we have upped our frequency and we continue to live stream today. At the management level, though, most find it very risky to open up and expose the inner workings of a title's development. However, since then, many teams and companies have adapted this approach, and the results prove the effectiveness. Rather than being silent and not gaining the understanding from your fans, it's so much healthier to share and talk about your vision, your direction, and have the fans participate in the discussion. So at this point, we're 9 months into development of ARR. This outcome wasn't limited to the work of the core development staff, but the entire team really came together and made it happen. Hereafter, I gradually shifted the original 14 staff members onto the development of ARR, and we went into full gear and expanded our mass production capacity. At the controlled demo of ARR at Gamescom in 2012, I remember nervously standing on stage, worrying that the game was going to crash. We were connected to our server in Japan, but the alpha client had just gone online. Even so, iteration was happening pretty frequently around alpha testing. Especially the implementation of the navigation path went through numerous retakes, and the staff worked really, really hard. Additionally, the alpha test was a huge milestone in terms of meeting player expectations. So the adjustments and tuning orders from just myself alone were in the hundreds. And I should take this chance to thank my team for their hard work and dedication. Thanks, guys. What I shared with you today on the development of ARR is really only a glimpse of what went behind the scenes. With each phase and each section, a lot of detailed efforts and ideas were packed in. Due to the limited time we have today, I have to omit those subjects, but hopefully in the future, here at GDC, maybe even next year, I would like the opportunity to share more specifics on management, field design, content design, and even UI. I'm sure you're tired of just seeing text up on the slides, but I'd like to show a video here. This was created exclusively for the press, so it'll be the first time I'm showing it in the public. It's a side-by-side comparison of the original 14 and an ARR. I'd like you to take a close look at the user interface and how it changed. The top half is ARR, the bottom, the original. As labeled appropriately, right is ARR, left original. Couldn't even jump in the original. But don't you agree? The graphics are beautiful. This is ARR. So this is the same area. This is from the original. This is the same area in ARR. There's the crystal right dead in the center. Original. And this is ARR, same location. A vast field in the original. It was a very vast field, but really, if you look at it, there's not much there to see. I don't even see a monster here. The same area. I think you could just feel the adventure quality and elements just by looking at it. Okay, let's look at the battle system. This is from the same level. You can see that the battlefield is completely different. Awesome. So again, the unhealthy obsession in creating the highest graphics sort of quality possible, but then overlooking the player's experience. So what did you think? Unfortunately, you can easily see how the early stages of 14 overemphasize the graphics and overlook the game experience. However, I do want to let you know that with the various updates and monetization kicking into the original, from when we started monetizing and to the end of service, our user base actually tripled in size. So thanks to the fans who stuck it out during this period, and the efforts of our development team resulted in these numbers. It's proof that persistent updates are the most important element for MMORPG. So even though we really faced a huge failure, I think the end result of continuing to stick to what we had set out as a goal turned out to really be a success. So those of you in this room today, how many are involved in MMORPGs? Can I see some hands? Oh, quite a lot here today. So I think you'll have a hard time with this question. I don't know. I can't count how many times I've been asked it. And every time I end up giving a long answer. So it's the same for me too. It's a difficult question, but the answer is this graph here means nothing. It's not really a question. It's not free-to-play versus subscription. It's nothing more than an option. There are merits and demerits to both. And I believe the business model that fits the game should be selected. It's not really a right or wrong thing either. There may be certain player or market needs, and I think it's all right to have even both systems implemented. As I just mentioned earlier, even with the original FF14, the result is that a lot of people end up monetizing. The bottom line is players will play if the game is fun, and if not, they won't play. So it's not which is better. As long as games are entertainment, that is everything, and players will pay for the value. Therefore, it's not a versus relationship. I believe it's important to base the discussion on which model suits the game better. Lastly, I like to talk about my thoughts on the future of MMORPGs and the lessons we learned through this FF14 experience. Through the experiences operating and developing this large-scale FF14 game, I feel very strongly about this. To put an importance on ease of updating. You may think, yeah, of course, but this is an extremely challenging goal with its roots in design. I often get asked by the media, what are the differences between ARR and World of Warcraft? And I always answer, WoW conquered the world with 12 million players strong. That's the base of MMORPGs. What they can do in WoW is a given to them, and it's extremely challenging to even do what they do so well. Trying to do anything new is beyond that. Of course, that's me with the Red Bull in one hand. And then even though I'm slammed on the floor, I take another Red Bull and then wake up. So very quickly, here's a list of the minimum requirements or the mandatories from an MMORPG these days. Okay, so stable login server, stable lobby server, character customization, freedom, abundant gear selection, intuitive yet information-heavy user interface, game balance. I mean, the list just goes on and on. But this is like the minimum requirement to make an MMORPG. Of course, I'm going to be slammed on the floor. And, you know, MMORPGs are highly expandable and therefore can be easily compared to other ones that have been in operation for a few years. So this is what happens. Oh no. It's like a child entering elementary school being compared to a high school student or even a college student, kind of like what you see here. But from the player, it's kind of a given. So in developing MMORPGs, you need to constantly ask yourself what's next. Whether you like it or not, you will be compared against the others. Think about what's possible, what's not. Also make it clear why it's not possible. You know, content is king. It's very important to have the environment and plan to support the mass production of content. Ultimately, you have an update plan and need to secure the resources. If this plan can't be implemented, you'll never reach the point of knocking out brand new elements. Obviously, to get all this done is extremely difficult. And I believe this is the most important thing to rack your brains when developing an MMORPG. Consequently, it may be that the most challenging thing is securing the funds and resources for the team. So one more thing. I think that it's really important, at least for me, the communication with your players. And I'm not trying to sound like I know everything, but I see similarities between MMORPGs and running a country. The players are citizens. If they are dissatisfied with government policies, they will choose to leave. Or if they think there's no future, they will quickly move over to another MMORPG. And communicating the vision, your goals, are extremely important. They want to and need to know where this is all headed. Don't be afraid of the booing and the jeering. Those who already gave up on the game won't be yelling for change. Their biggest coup d'etat is to quietly uninstall the game and leave. So it's important to have that communication with your players and really identify what's not working or what are they having issues with. And lastly, don't forget the fact that you are also a citizen of the country. If you can't live here, in other words, if you're not the core gamer, then don't expect others to live a long life here either. I do believe that I need to be the most sort of core gamer that I can possibly be. Since the perspectives of the developer or operator and players are different, there will always be points that don't quite intersect. Especially the life of the content is something that will clash, but because of that, it would be wrong not to discuss it. We are all citizens united under one roof or one game, so we need to further develop a mutual understanding and give life to the country. That, I believe, is the most important factor in operating an MMORPG. We, Square Enix, learned a lot of lessons through this FF14 project. Although it was a monstrous failure, at the same time, I feel it was the most important time in terms of awareness and changing the ways of our thinking. Fans around the world have supported the Final Fantasy franchise, and they are our compatriots, not rivals or enemies. Surely, the expectations for our visuals is still important, but even more important is the game experience that made you fans cry and move at times, watching notable scenes throughout the series. That's what led us to Final Fantasy today. We will never stop challenging ourselves. We will continue to march forward. And what makes Final Fantasy the fans expect. And if we're missing even one element, that it's not Final Fantasy. That's what I learned again. Even though I talked big about ARR today, in the MMORPG universe, I see it still as a baby chocobo with a green beak. I would like it to jump around, bounce around, and at times maybe even gain some weight and swim across the ocean, and hopefully one day fly high in the skies. We will continue to nurture it and give it our best. Thank you, everyone, for coming by today.
それではフライトの時間までギリギリまで。
So, I'm actually taking off from San Francisco tonight, and I don't have a lot of time, and I know that this session hour is coming to a close, but we're going to go into Q&A. So if you have any questions, please stand up, line up in front of the microphone, please. Thank you.
So, how has the fan feedback been with the implementation of references to the previous games like Crystal Tower from 3 and the upcoming Golden Saucer to 7? Is it seeming like it's something that you're going to keep doing in the future?
はい。すみません、これ、一回質問を日本語に直してもらったら、僕が日本語で答えて英語になるので、ちょっと時間がかかるので、ご了承。今、先ほどおっしゃいましたけど、クリスタルタワーは次のアップデートもありますし、ゴールドソーサーも今、ゲームデザインがかなり進んできています。他にも、まだ全然言えないですけど、いっぱい皆さんが、あ、それは知ってるとか、聞いただけでワクワクするようなコンテンツたくさん計画していますので、僕今日この後日本に戻ってまた生放送をやるので、そこでまたいろんなお話ができる。
So just for y'all listening, for the Q&A session, it's not going to be exactly a simultaneous translation so that we could get all the answer from him. So please give us a moment. In response to the first question, the answer is yes, moving forward. In fact, the Golden Saucer, we have the game design for that is actually moving forward. And what I can really say is there's lots of content that I think you guys will recognize or remember from the previous series. After this, once I board on the plane in Japan, we have a live event, and I may be hinting at some of those things, so you may want to tune in.
In designing a Realm Reborn, how was player feedback gathered and implemented in the design process?
プレイヤーの皆さんからのフィードバックは僕基本的にフォーラム信じられないかもしれないですけど本当にひたすら見てますしフォーラムを毎日レポートしてくれるスタッフが世界中合わせると20人近くいるので彼らのレポートと、僕が実際に読んでいるところから、毎週プレイヤーフィードバックの中から対応しなければいけないものというのは実はリストアップをして一つずつどのパッチでどういった対応をするかもしくはこういう、例えばユーザーインターフェースのここを変えてほしいただそこを変えてしまうとゲームデザインが崩れる場合もあるのでその場合はその理由をしっかりじゃあこれはフォーラムにポストをしよう一つ一つそうやってどう対応するかいつのパッチで対応するか対応するのかしないのかそれを一つ一つ丁寧に今でも続けてます。
So I don't know if you guys will believe this or not, but basically, I do go or continue to and have continued to. So back then I was going to the forums on a daily basis. There was also a daily forum report, collected by a staff of over 20 people, in our global offices. And I would read each and one of them. So on a weekly basis, we would gather up the player feedback and actually list up one by one which one we were going to deal with, even called out or maybe planned out which patch we were going to try to implement that. And if it had something particular, like let's say a user interface issue, well, we wanted to fix it, but then that was going to affect the game design in whatever ways, then we would clarify why we weren't addressing that right away, and then maybe say that we will deal with that, later in the future, or this next patch will address those issues. We wanted to make sure that our answers were out there as much as possible, and that we would give the answers, yes, we're dealing with it, or no, we're not, or we are working on it. That's basically how we dealt with it.
日本語で、
もちろん
それで英語でもいいですか？
はい。
じゃあ、日本語で、
はい
プロデューサーとしてもしくはデザイナーとしてRealm Reborn を作る時の一番の困難は何でしたか？But the question I ask is, as a producer or as a game designer, what was the number one issue you had in creating Realm Reborn?
寝る時間がなかった。
So before I give you guys the answer, unfortunately we're running out of time, so this was the last question. We're actually going over time. But in response to that question, so half jokingly, the number one sort of challenge and issue was that there was no time for sleep for me. But the real serious answer is that to have people believe in me, basically to build that trust relationship and gain that trust from everyone. This project started off in such a sort of negative atmosphere in a negative way. And I myself, because I was not involved in the original 14. My name wasn't out there. I was basically a no face, no name person. And so promising an update to the original 14 was one thing. Bringing it out, really proving that we can do it was another. And then slowly but surely, one step at a time, I think earning that trust from the player and the community was the most difficult thing. It was very challenging for me. Once we got to the announcement of ARR, then it was, okay, the next time we have something to present, whether it's the alpha or the beta, I felt like every time there was something that I can sort of prove our team's work and efforts, I gained a little bit of trust every step along the way. So overall, aside from the challenges we faced purely on the development side, I think that sort of non-development, just gaining that trust quality was the most difficult thing for me.
来てしまったようなので、できるだけ会場に残りますので、
So our time is up, unfortunately, in this room, but Yoshida-san is gracious enough to take some questions if you do have some still outside, maybe in the hallway. But for now, we are going to be ending this session. So thank you very much. And thank you.